Hi everyone, my name is Nick Gulic and I run a web and marketing agency in Sydney, Australia. One of the things I'm pretty good at in my agency is handling sales meetings with potential clients. So today I'm going to be explaining the framework I use to dominate those meetings. I've called this talk Sell by Helping because my approach is all about helping the prospect I'm speaking to rather than selling to them. So there are 4 parts to my talk today. Firstly, why we have a framework in the first place. Then I'll go through the framework itself. I'll run through each phase of this framework. And then at the end, I'll recap everything I ran through. So someone smart once said, if you don't have a system to sell, you'll be at the mercy of your prospect system to buy. So what this means is that if you're not controlling the process, you're basically relying on however the person you're talking to wants to do things. And I can guarantee you that won't work in your favor. I mean, a prospect is highly unlikely to let you run through how much value you can bring, right? You need to prompt that. So rather than relying on the client realizing you're awesome all on their own, the framework is what's going to help make that happen. So why? Why does this help? Right? Well, you might have noticed earlier in the subtitle of this talk on the title sheet, I called it a website consultant's framework for selling. Now that's because I don't really sell websites. I'm a consultant. I solve problems. I sell solutions. Even though many times that solution will be a website, and potentially it could even be the same kind of website someone else would have done. What I have sold is not that, right? What I have sold is the solution or the outcome of what that's going to achieve. And that's worth quite a bit to people. So my framework is there to get that message across. Having this system means that the client won't look at me like I'm there to take an order for a website. Right? They look at me like I'm a consultant. I'm there to help. I'm there to teach them something. I'm there to help them achieve a result. Right? I'm going to fix a problem in their business. Right? So because I get to solve problems, I get to give them solutions. Now, part of the process is that we get to identify how much that solution is worth to them. Right? And that's definitely information people are unlikely just to volunteer. Now, if you solve problems that are worth a lot, it means you probably get to charge a lot, right? So you will make more money selling solutions than you will selling websites. And of course, by doing this, by giving solutions to people and positioning yourself as a consultant rather than an order taker, you end up working with clients that respect you more, right? And that makes for a very fun business. Now, this is something that has built up over years, right? This isn't something that I was born doing. This isn't something that I did the first time I spoke to a client. This process and this framework comes from years and years of selling solutions to people. It comes from me having to teach sales teams how to do that. Eventually, when I had my own consulting practice, I was teaching clients how to do this and clients' teams how to do this stuff. So this comes from a lot of trial and error and learning and being in business and doing it for a living. That's got me to where I am with this framework. And so that's what I would like to show you guys today. So the framework itself, well, when I look back, right, throughout the course of my career, I realized that some of the most successful meetings, the ones that I really knock it out of the park, achieve just the greatest possible result, right? The greatest possible result. They go through 3 very distinct phases. So firstly, it's about understanding. Right? I need to understand the client, their problem, what objectives they have. And then generally I'll go through a period of education. Right? So I educate them on the reality of their problem. Why they've failed previously or their last website didn't work. And then what they actually need for that all to work properly. And then generally I'll close things out by explaining how I'll fix the problem I'll answer any questions they might have and give them the next steps. I mean, you could almost call this education as well, right? I've called it close because it's the close of the meeting. So phase one, right? Let's kick this off, right? The meeting has started and we've gotten all the greetings out of the way. We're down to business. So as part of the understanding phase, there's three key things we really need to understand. Number one, we need to know the current situation. Two is we need to know the problem that they're facing and the impact of that problem. And then we need to know what they want. Like, what are their goals in working with you? What do they want to achieve by having this solution that you're going to be putting in place? So going back to this quote, in most cases, clients are pretty happy for you to do your thing. But sometimes you might get a prospect that wants to run the meeting. So they'll start with questions right from the get-go. Or they might even try something really offensive, like, tell me what you can do for me, with a whole lot of arrogance. That's because that's part of their system to buy. Now, instead of playing that game, what we'll do is we'll flip things around so we have control. And if you think about it, generally speaking, control is with the person that asks the questions. So we'll actually get control by asking a question. And the question is usually something along the lines of, in order to be able to see what we can do for you, I'll need to ask you some questions. Is that okay? Now, don't forget, you're the expert at this. They're not, no matter how hard they try to convince you otherwise. So I've only ever had one person argue with me when I did this. One person. And they were just someone who was looking for a cheap price. They didn't want details. They didn't value websites. And I ultimately told them I couldn't help them. Right? Don't play that game. Because even if you win, really, you lose. So we have permission to lead. They actually gave us permission to go through our process, which is great. So let's do that. Right? So the first thing we're asking about is them and their business. And there's some questions that we probably need to go through. And some of them are pretty basic. Tell me what you do. How long have you been running this business? How did you start? How did you get to where you are today? What sort of clients do you normally work with? What sort of services do you offer? Where do your clients normally come from? And so on, so forth. Depending on what you're interested in and what you need to know, you ask more questions. And the objective is to get them to open up. People often love to talk about themselves and don't always have many opportunities to do that. So by doing this, you're making them feel more comfortable in talking to you, and you're getting the information you need to be able to understand the problem. So now that we do understand the situation, we move on and we get to start asking about the problem they're facing. Now, this part of the process is very fluid because you just don't know what they're going to say. So I'll often start things off by asking something like, what made you decide you needed a new website? And then I just dig deep on every single answer. They'll give me something and I'll say, okay, and then what? Okay, and then what does that do? And then, and then, and then. This helps you get to the root of the problem and also leads you to the impact of this problem. For example, if they aren't getting enough leads, what does that actually mean? How many are they getting? How many do they normally need to get a new client? Without understanding their problem and without understanding the impact of the problem, you won't really be able to know if you're going to fix anything or not. So speaking of fixing, once we understand their business and the problem they're facing, we'll need to look at what they actually want to happen. Right? They might have approached you for a website, but what were they expecting that website to do? Because here's the thing, no one actually wants a website. What they want is for their problem to get solved. and they just happen to think that the website is what's going to solve that problem. So you need to find out if it will. That's the point of everything we're doing right now. So let's say they're ultimately after more sales. How much more? How much is one client worth? How many clients will it take for them to reach the extra sales they want? If you can get this back to numbers, it will make your life a lot easier because you'll start to identify the value of what you're doing. I mean, let's say you have a client that wants to make an extra $100,000 a year as a result of this website. How much is that website worth if it achieves that result? By making these numbers clear, not only do you understand the value of the website, but the client starts to see it too. And of course, you can help them see that by repeating what they're telling you. For example, it could be, so what you're saying is we need this website to generate an extra $100,000 in sales for you each year. So we've got a solid understanding of the client. We understand their problem. We understand the impact that problem has. And we also understand their objectives and how much those objectives are worth. So before moving on, it's a really good idea to clarify that you got everything. And the easiest way to do that is to ask. So before I move on, I just want to make sure that I've understood everything. And then you give a summary version of what you just went through. Now, if you're right about everything, great, you get to move forward. If not, if you've missed something, well, now you get to go back and rectify that by asking more questions. Now, so far, you might notice we haven't talked about ourselves and what we do at all. It's all been 100% about the client. There's no bragging, no showing off, no telling them how wonderful we are, none of that. We're just asking questions, we're listening to their answers, and we're showing them that we understand. So that leads us to the education section of the meeting. Now, education itself will happen across three key areas. Firstly, we're talking about the real problem. What is that? And it might not even be what they were originally thinking. Why previous solutions failed, and what they really need to solve their problem. So the first part of this phase is letting them know the real problem they're facing. And it might not be that their website is ugly. It might just be that it's the wrong website for their target audience. Or they might think the website doesn't generate leads, but it's actually the wrong type of website for the marketing they're doing, and there's just a disconnect between what people expect and what they get. When you go through this process with them and you explain exactly what the real problem is, it's like a light bulb of realization goes off for them. Now, these light bulbs going off, they're like a currency for you, seriously. The more light bulbs, the more they see you as an expert and the more they want to work with you. Now, hopefully, the solution they need involves your service offering, but it might not. And that's okay. You are much better off telling people that they don't need you and pointing them in the direction of what they really do need, rather than taking their money and delivering something that won't help them. Helping is the most important thing you can do in this situation. You're a service provider. So helping others helps your reputation, right? And it leads you to better clients. And honestly, the good karma you get from putting good out into the world, it can't hurt. So the next part of this phase, this is where you let them know why previous solutions didn't work. And this is directly tied to the real problem they have. So the reason your last website failed was because it wasn't designed for your audience. And so you'd only get contacted by poor quality leads. The reason why your last website failed was because it had an overwhelming quantity of information, and visitors would get lost reading and end up not needing to contact you or just not wanting to speak to you. The reason your last website failed was because, whatever the reason might be. And you'll probably have a really good idea about this potentially going into the conversation. But because we've just explained their real problem and we know their objectives, we get to make this much more compelling. right? These are things that they actually care about because they've told you they matter. As part of this process, we also educate the client on why these things make a difference. For example, your audience are mostly women, but your site had a very harsh look to it, very angular, very masculine. And so that style typically would put women off. Now, if your site had used more appropriate styling and more appropriate colors for women, uh, the, your audience would likely spend more time on the site, would give it more of a chance, and usually take more action. At least that's what the studies show. Now, of course, how well you can educate will really depend on your skills and your background. If you have a really solid design background or a branding background, you'll probably be able to focus on those elements and educate on those areas. If your background is more marketing or copywriting, you'll probably focus on those areas, right? And there's a balance that needs to be struck here. You don't need to overwhelm them with information. You just need to touch on it a little bit. You need to give them just enough information to have one of those light bulb moments I mentioned earlier, but not that much info that they'll fall asleep or zone out, right? You don't want to be lecturing them. You just want to teach them something. So this education helps position you as an authority that can solve the problem. It also means that you're someone who is able to explain things in language they understand, right? So, I mean, if you can understand the problem, you can explain it in a way that they're going to understand and it makes sense to them. Doesn't that automatically mean you'll understand the solution? Now, you might not, but it's pretty likely that you will. So, of course, this leads us very nicely into the solution itself. Right? So the next part of this phase is the solution. And you guide them into what they really need. If the solution is a website, what do they need from that website? Are there certain features they might need? Does it need to be designed a certain way? This part is actually pretty easy because you're just using the opposites of the reasons it didn't work last time. Now, this seems like a pretty long-winded process to ultimately just tell them they need a website. But that's because you're not telling them they need a website. You're telling them they need a website that does something specific, which is how you'll solve their problem. And that's the key, that solution. The solution is the part that's worth money. I mean, we even figure that out in the first phase of this meeting when we started talking about their objectives. Now, I can promise you, not many people can actually educate their clients very well. If you take the time to do this and you do it right, you'll be in a league of your own. You can charge a lot more at that point. For perspective, in my local area, no one charges as much as I do to do what I do. Uh, Generally, websites are, I would say, potentially up to half of what I charge. So now we're getting to the final part of the sales meeting, and that's the close. Now, don't panic and don't let the name scare you. This isn't your typical always be closing approach to sales, right? This is just the tail end of the meeting. This is also where you decide whether you work together or not. Now, this is almost, I mean, you could really call this education still, because all we're doing is we're giving the prospective client more information. So, except up until now, everything has still been 100% about them. And now we're at the point where we start to bring ourselves into this a little bit more. So similar to previous phases, we're going through three parts. Right, so there's a bit of a pattern here. Firstly, we're going to cover the logistics of the solution, including how much it will cost them. Then we'll handle any objections they might have. And then finally, we'll give them the next steps that they need to take in order for you and them to do business together. So let's start with logistics. Right, how will you actually do this? And this is your time to shine. Right, this is where you go through your process. So does the project go through phases? What are they? How long does everything take? How many people are involved? How often will you guys communicate? And how does that communication work? So what we're doing here is we're explaining the steps that you take to ensure you're delivering at high quality. And we're showing the client that this is more than just going and buying something, a product, right? There's a big process that you go through. And then we're going to let them know how much they'll need to invest to achieve this. Now, this could be something like, to do all of this and to deliver a site that will achieve those results we spoke about earlier, we'd be looking at an investment of around $25,000. Will that be a problem for you? Now, if you've run through everything properly, you usually don't have much of an issue when you reveal the price. They should understand the true value of what you're doing. And look, while they might have loved it to be less, they'll pay to have something that no one else seems to be in a position to deliver on, and that's a working solution. Sometimes, though, they might have a concern about the price, or they might have questions about something else. Maybe you didn't highlight the value very well. Maybe they don't agree. Could be anything. But that kicks off the next part of this phase, right, which is objection handling. Now, objections are what people come up with as excuses not to buy. And your job in this phase is to hear those excuses and give them answers that negate those excuses. And it isn't just hearing it, it's also understanding what they're really trying to say. Now, pricing can be a common one. It's something like, oh, I wasn't expecting it to be that much. Or that's a lot more than our last person charged. All that means is that you're higher than they were expecting. They went in with an expectation of what this was going to cost, and this is higher. They're not saying they don't want to do business with you, just that they were expecting a lower amount. I have to stress, you do not lower your price, right? You just need to handle the objection. So I can imagine this might seem like quite a lot, but I know the level of work that we go through to deliver these results, and it's the level of work we need to do to deliver the results. So that's just how much we need to charge to be able to do that, right? Or if they've compared you with the previous solution that isn't working, well, the main reason we're talking is because your previous solution wasn't working for you. Now, I would expect a working solution to require more investment than a non-working one. So I'd be very surprised if we weren't a lot higher. Now, don't forget, there's a reason why they're talking to you, right? And if you've done your job with this meeting, they understand that you're pretty much uniquely positioned to fix these problems. And you and they both probably have a good understanding of what this problem's worth to fix. So they want to work with you. They want to. They already want to work with you. They just need to clear any excuses to satisfy the logical part of their brain, right? The logical part is looking for, it's scared. It doesn't want to spend money. It doesn't want to risk anything. So you need to satisfy that part. So you handle any issues they raise, like these ones with pricing, timeframes, anything about the process, anything else they ask about or mention. Take away any and all excuses they have not to go ahead until they don't have any left. And if you're in doubt, you can ask. So we've established that this is what will help you achieve the outcomes you're looking for, and we've run through how it will all work, the investment required to make it happen. Do you see anything that would prevent you from moving forward with what I'm recommending? Now, either they'll pretty much agree to go ahead, or they'll let you know another objection that you get to handle. So once you've got every objection handled, you can then move on to the final bit of this phase, which is where you tell them what happens next. So will you send a proposal? When will you do that? What do they do with it? Is there any money to be paid? How much? Now in my case, if they're happy with everything, I'll tell them something along the lines of, what I'll do now is prepare a short proposal outlining everything I've recommended here today. You should receive it by the end of the week. All you need to do is read through it, and if it all makes sense, sign electronically, and then you get the option to pay a 30% deposit. Once that happens, I'll be able to get the ball rolling from my end. The key of finishing strong here is to make the next steps super easy for them to do. So let's recap. Here's a model of the framework that I use to control my sales meeting. Right, so this is what we went through. And we've got the three phases there, the understand, the educate, the close, and each of the sections within each phase. Now, if you do this right, you will get better results from your sales meetings. You'll be able to charge more, and you'll work with clients who treat you like an expert. And ultimately, it wasn't because you sold to them or did anything sleazy. No, you did it by helping. You listened and you educated them. And that makes all the difference. So thanks so much for watching and listening. I really hope you got a lot of value out of this. And if you have any questions, I'm not sure if there's a Q&A or if I'll even be able to be there due to time differences. But if I'm not available, please feel free to reach out to me in the Agency Trailblazer Facebook group.